What's up, gang? Welcome to the Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius and Steven. I'm so pumped to have you here with me. Now, listen, the Greatness Machine, we're about two things. Number one, people who are living their passions. And number two, those who are creating greatness in the world and doing both of these things despite the odds against them. Each episode, we're going to feature interviews with game changers, business leaders, telling us their origin stories, what made them tick, what got them to where they are now. Why? So it can help you step into your greatness within your life, your business, and your career. Occasionally, you might hear a few solo episodes from myself, moi as I say, as I leverage my 20 years of entrepreneurship as a CEO and founder to help you grow and level up in your journey to scale your life and your business. So, come be a fly on the wall, enjoy the conversation, and I'm stoked to have you here with me. Guys, welcome to today's episode of The Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius and Steven. Boy, do we have a special guest. My man, Steven Kotler, is in the house. What's up, Steven?
Good to be with you, Darius.
Oh, man, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you here. So you don't know this. I met one of your co-authors, Jamie Wheel, on Stealing Fire when you guys put that book out at MIT a couple years ago. And I got introduced to your work around flow and have really been kind of started following the work that you did. And it's really just excited to have you here to talk about all the amazing things. Today, we're going to be talking about your book that's coming out. I believe it's in February. Is that correct? Gnar Country?
Yep, so, that is correct.
Very cool. So we're talking about Gnar Country, growing old while staying young. I just added the while in there. It's just staying rad. Excuse me. Growing old, staying rad.
It doesn't matter. It's the beginning of the people crushing the title. It's good. This is just hearing variations on a theme.
Well, I'm so excited to talk to you about the book. Was pumped to get an advanced copy of it to get to read. But before we go there, I wanted to give a little bit of your formal bio. So for listeners who may not be familiar with your work, Steven is just a royal badass. He's a New York Times bestselling author, an award-winning journalist, and the executive director of the Flow Research Collective. He's actually one of the world's foremost authorities and leading experts on human performance. And so we're going to be talking all about how you've taken your work and actually applied it on yourself in your new book, Gnar Country. So welcome to the show, man.
Good to be here.
So I wanted to, first and foremost, at The Greatness Machine, we're about two things here at the show. People are living their passions and those creating greatness in the world. And the book's really like kind of a testament to you doing those two things. I'd love if, before we get into the book though, if you wouldn't mind, kind of giving a little bit of your origin story. How did you get into the world of writing and how, really getting into this world of flow and performance, peak performance, and all the things that you've been working on over the past couple of decades? I'd love to hear the beginning of that and what's brought you to the current book.
I'm going to try to do this as quickly as possible because there's no quick, simple answer. Writing is what I've always done. So since I was 4 years old, I started writing. My grandmother was a poet, and I'm using that term very loosely here. What I really mean is my grandmother wrote things that could go on Hallmark greeting cards, but I didn't know any better when I was 4 years old. And so I jumped right in. I started writing, and by the time I was 10 or 11, 12, I was writing every day. And so it was never a question of what was I going to do. What direction was I going to take? It was more of an open question. When I got out of graduate school and sort of stumbled into journalism, mostly as a way to pay the bills while I was finishing my first novel, which was the goal. Journalism is this amazing career, especially when I stumbled into it, where whatever you were curious about, you could go explore and maybe earn a living. And I was fascinated by two things: neuroscience, and especially this is in the 1990s. So neuroscience is just starting to focus on what I'm really curious about, which is human performance and really how do people work. And up until the 90s, nobody really talked about behavioral neuroscience. It was a sort of ridiculous thing. We were just trying to figure out what are all the parts of the brain, what do they do, how do neurons function, all that stuff. But in the 90s, we started understanding emotions and consciousness and things along those lines. You can ask behavioral questions. And so I was doing a lot of that. And simultaneously, I was covering action sports. This is early days. So action sports is mostly deep punk rock subculture at this point. It's not, the Gravity Games have just started, the X Games, but it's really sort of a punk rock subculture. And I was fascinated, and I was living in these communities, and I was hanging out with these athletes. And if you know anything about the 1990s, in action sports, it's often referred to as the era of impossible, where more impossible feats, things that had never been done before, and we believe were never going to get done, got done. And I always say it's one thing to see an athlete do something that appear Laird Hamilton surfing an 80-foot wave, on a screen. It's an entirely different thing when you go drinking with a group of your friends on a Friday night, and then a Saturday morning you go into the backcountry, and one of them does something that for all of recorded history, it's never been done before, and it was made worse, quote unquote. Most of the people I knew, they were not paradigms of anything you would think of with peak performance. There was like, folks had very little education. They had very little money. They had rotten childhoods, broken homes, a lot of risk taking and substance abuse in the community. And normally you put those things together, and people die young or go to jail. And what they don't do is reinvent what's possible for the species. And that's what was going on. And I wanted to know what was happening. And that was sort of my introduction into the world of flow science, which is essentially where I've stayed since then, and have just, I explored first as a journalist, then then in dozens of books, and now with the Flow Research Collective, I run a international research organization, and we do this work with top neuroscientists at major institutions. So how I'm doing the research and how I'm writing about it has changed over the years. But the topic is pretty much writing was always the thing, and exploring these ideas has always been the thing.
I love it. And so quick question on that. So when you were out there, and I know you talk about this in the book, and we get in the book in a second, like obviously you have a love affair with skiing, right? And so when you were out in the backcountry and growing up skiing and getting involved in that world, were you looking at that and I guess having that interest in human performance, where you're like, oh, this is flow, I want to go learn more about the flow state? Or was it, how did that that connection get made?
Yeah, this is a long answer, but the first bit of it that makes the most sense is flow is, at that point when I was poking at this, a psychological term, right? There were a lot of synonyms: in the zone, peak performance, peak experiences, on and on and on. And nobody knew, were all these the same thing? Were they different things? One of the reasons I was so fascinated with the neuroscience is the psychological language was all over the place. And then the popular language was even more confusing. But if you talk to the athletes and said, how are you doing this? They all said the same thing. When I'm performing my best, when I'm doing these so-called supposedly impossible things, I'm in an altered state of consciousness where, I feel my best and I perform my best. And they would describe a flow state in various ways, but it was very clear that the athletes were all saying the same thing. And to give you like the irony of it, one of the things that the athletes were all saying is, hey, when I have this experience, it feels like I've become one with everything. Like I've lost my sense of self and I've become one with everything. So my leg up on this work, if it ever happened, was Andrew Newberg, who was the very first neuroscientist to start examining so-called mystical experiences in the brain. He put a bunch of Tibetan Buddhists, a bunch of Franciscan nuns who both experience cosmic unity, this feeling of oneness with everything, in their meditations, into brain scanners, and said, what the hell is going on in your brain while you're experiencing? And I called them and I said, hey man, I've been interviewing action sport athletes for a very long time. They're describing this experience where part of it is they feel one with everything. Do you think we're looking at the same thing? So I actually started there with this phenomenological, this experience, and it wasn't entirely clear it was flow for a little while longer. Flow was probably a year. I came in through like, hey, there's these weird mystical experiences that I know aren't mystical and are biological, but they're common in all these weird places. What the hell's going on? Why are Buddhists, meditators and surfers having the same experience? What's going on there? Those were some of the early questions I was asking.
Got it. And so I want to move into the book, because like I normally I would go into the book way later, but I literally had 30 questions. I had to pare down my questions. I mean, it's an awesome book. B, it's just so cool that like you're essentially the guinea pig for the work in the book. So I've never gotten to speak to someone that's actually done what you accomplished in the book. So first and foremost, the book's title is Gnar Country, GNAR, for those people that are not familiar with the word Gnar. Can you tell us about the title of the book? What does it mean?
Yeah, for sure.
That a little bit. Yeah.
So the book is about peak performance aging, right? And we can go into a lot greater detail, but Gnar is action sports slang, and it's action sports slang for high in perceived risk and high in actual risk. So if an action sport athlete describes like a ski run as the Gnar, they're saying, look, like you got to have your shit together if you're going to go in there, because it doesn't just look scary. It's actually scary. You better be able to drive focus and use it to drop into flow. Otherwise, you've got a problem. But that's sort of besides the point. I realized it's a phenomenal description of our later years, high in perceived risk and high in actual risk, and a really great description of sort of the gritty mindset with which to thrive in those later years. And country is, of course, any terrain or territory or landscape. So Gnar Country to me was, wow, this is a really good description of what's coming for us and what we need to thrive under those conditions. And obviously, we've alluded to it enough. Gnar Country is my attempt to run a very sort of a radical experiment in peak performance aging. I tried to teach myself how to park ski at age 53. And you are right. I'm a lifelong skier, but I had zero park skiing experience, and a lot of stuff, like the odds were against me. There for a ton of different reasons, 7 or 8 biological reasons. It's essentially supposed to be impossible for anybody over the age of 25 or 35 to really learn how to park ski. And there were a bunch of reasons why I did it. And but we can get all into that, but thus the title, Gnar Country.
Got it. And so for listeners who are like myself, a snowboarder, B, not super like avid, I'm like way more recreational. I love the work around flow, which made the book super interesting. But what can you describe what park skiing is? Because I think a lot of people, I didn't know what it was till I heard it.
Park skiing is the discipline. It's freestyle, and it's a discipline in skiing and snowboarding, by the way, that involves terrain parks. So it involves doing tricks off jumps and doing trips onto rails and boxes. So rails are literally long metal pipes laid out on the snow that you can slide across. They're slicker than ice, incredibly dangerous, but you can do really amazing things. It's a very acrobatic pursuit. It takes place pretty far above the ground. The way I explained it in the book, and I still think this is apt, is I was essentially a big mountain skier, which is essentially being a speed skater. Right. Almost everything I did in one direction while staying in contact with the surface of the earth. Park skiing is like figure skating, right? It's 3-dimensional, and a lot of the stuff you do takes place above the surface of the earth, and it's not one direction. It's, spinning and flipping and skiing backwards and all that stuff. And so that was the idea. And I came to it I had never really had any interest in park skiing, but something unlocked a door. First of all, I had, for a variety of different reasons, I've been studying peak performance aging. There's, a ton of stuff that's not in the book. So this has been a field of interest for almost 20 years before I came to this book. But what really started building up again and again and again is everybody kept saying you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And there was all this cool research coming out of positive psychology, coming out of network neuroscience, embodied cognition, adult development, a couple other fields that said, no, that's really wrong. In fact, in our later years, we come into all these cognitive superpowers. They're going to accelerate learning. They should make it easier for an old dog to learn new tricks, and should make it possible for an older athlete to progress in seemingly impossible activities like park skiing. And I thought when I started the experiment that I would have, maybe, you know what I mean? Maybe like I made a list of goals. I came up with 20 tricks that essentially define 0 to intermediate. And I figured maybe it'll take me 5 years. And it like 5 years from now, I'm a park skier. Cool, fine. We'll go that slow. I ended up accomplishing it in a single season. That was amazing. Let me tell you a couple things that aren't in the book or at the very end of the book, but that was amazing. My ski partner, as you know, like his story is in the book, Ryan, he's 20 years younger than me, and he's actually a former sponsored athlete, but he had gotten injured, had been away, had a family, raised 3 kids, right, been away from the sport for a really long time. He came back, and he was using all the same theories I was applying, and he was making ridiculous leaps and bounds progress. So both of us were like, okay, this is fascinating. What the hell's going on here? That's the story told in the book as an addendum to the book. But this happened last year. What we essentially had was a very intriguing but very small pilot study with 2 subjects, right?
Right.
But what we did this past year is we took all the ideas at the heart of the learning protocol, took a group of 17 older adults ages 29 to 68 and snowboarders and skiers, and used the same protocols and taught them how to park ski in far less time than it took me to learn. So we've continued to test it. We've taken it now out of park skiing and snowboarding, and we've just drawn our second group of sort of test subjects through that, and we're starting to see that like all these same ideas can be applied anywhere. So it's not, it started in Parksky with this crazy experiment, but now, even in the time since the book's been written, we've carried it out to, older adults everywhere.
I love that, man. There's a point you made in the book, early in the book, where you talk about the intrinsic motivators at midlife being passion, purpose, autonomy, and mastery. I'm curious how you see biology of flow interplays with these, macro ideas.
Okay, so this is sort of an idea that was at the heart of my book, Art of Impossible, in the motivation section. And we meaning people who study human performance, but there are 5 major intrinsic internal motivators. There are tons more, right? But there are 5 big ones, and they're curiosity, passion, purpose, autonomy, and mastery. And in a sense, they work in sequence, right? Curiosity is designed to be built into passion. Passion is designed to be coupled to something greater than yourself. Thus, you get purpose. Once an organism, humans has purpose, it wants autonomy, the freedom to pursue that purpose. And once you have autonomy, you want mastery, the skills to pursue it well. So if you're interested in amplifying motivation, all 5 of those are phenomenal. They are also, because when all 5, any of those are present, we get a lot of neurochemistry generated in our body that tends to drive focus into the present moment. Flow states have triggers, preconditions that lead to more flow, and intensely focused attention on the task at hand is the most important thing. And, there's a bunch of neurobiology underneath that, dopamine, norepinephrine, things like that. So all of these, curiosity, passion, purpose, autonomy, mastery, they're all flow triggers. So they do double duty. So they're big intrinsic motivators, but flow, which besides being, a state of optimal performance where we feel our best and perform our best, just about the most addictive, joyful, pleasurable, rewarding state on earth, right? So what happens is you get all this motivation from having those intrinsic motivators set up properly, and then flow just turbo boosts all of what you have, which is why McKinsey went out and did a 10-year study asking top executives how much more productive they feel in flow, and it's self-reported, so grain of salt. The average was like 500% more productive.
Wow.
So it's a significant boost, and very pleasurable neurochemistry and really rewarding. Definitely drives flow. And I don't know. So one of the things people don't know about flow is often talked about in the context of peak performance. It is not as frequently talked about in the context of learning and adult development. Adult development is literally the study of how do we grow up? How do we become adults? What happens? We used to think like Piaget, who was the first person to realize that, hey, wait a minute, people go through these stages of development, and it started with kids. It took a really long time to figure out that adult development continues throughout life, and it doesn't stop. What Csikszentmihalyi, the godfather of flow psychology, has, I want to say discovered, but let's say argued over and over again in 5 or 6 of his books very eloquently. Flow appears to be the engine of adult development. And you have to understand this to drop into flow. I mentioned flow states have triggers. The golden rule of flow, it's called the challenge skills balance. The idea is we pay the most attention to the task at hand when the challenge slightly exceeds our skill set. You want to stretch but not snap. So when you drive yourself into flow, because you're stretching on your skills, you come out the other side with a little more mastery. You're a more adaptable, complex creature. And you also gain, and we know this, you gain a lot of the things that we think of that go along with adult development. You gain empathy. You get insight into other perspectives. So you gain wisdom. All of those things are part of what you get in flow. It's part of optimal performance, right? And so Csikszentmihalyi has argued that this is the engine that drives us forward. And certainly, final thing I'll say, all the research on adult development says, on peak performance aging really says, we want to, the amount of flow we can have in the second half of our lives is really, really, really going to determine the quality of the second half of our lives.
Right.
That much is really clear too.
Interesting. God, I have so many places to go from here, but I'm gonna stay on task. I swear to God, I think I did more research for this interview than I did for any other interview, just because I knew that we were gonna have so much stuff to cover. But in the book, it was really interesting watching you go through the process of getting ready to get ready for this, this season and a half of essentially, accomplishing these crazy goals. You talk about stack practices, which I thought was really interesting. This idea of, combining different things to maximize your time and to accomplish this nearly impossible task. Can you talk us through what is a stack practice?
Yeah, for sure.
How did you do that?
It's a great question. This is something we have leveraged and used at the Flow Research Collective. So we're not just a research organization, we're a training organization, right? We work in 130 countries, and we work with companies like Facebook and Bain Capital and Accenture and Audi, and we work with tons of individuals. And sure, we work with professional athletes and members of the U.S. Special Forces or whatever, but most of the people we work with are just like you and me, right? Like we'll do soccer moms from Iowa and insurance brokers from Indiana and coders from Delhi and traders from London. And, the only commonality I think that everybody across the board has that we work with is they're all really busy. So time management really matters. And this becomes so much more important in that second half of our lives. And let me just make a very bold, we can come back to the science underneath this if you want. Let me just make a kind of a crazy statement, but it'll help explain this. So most people, when they think about aging, their idea is what I call the long, slow route theory, right? Our physical and mental skills decline over time, and there's nothing we can do to stop the slide. And nothing could actually be farther from the truth. There's a pile of research that started showing up in the 90s and has continued to grow till now that says all the skills, and I'm talking physical skills, mental skills, everything across the board we used to think declined over time, we now know are use it or lose it skills. And if you never stop training these skills, they never go away. But like just on the physical side, right? Even if you're just going to the level of functional fitness, that's strength, stamina, balance, and agility. Agility is balance and speed, and flexibility. Most of those things have to be trained independently in one way or another. So unless you can, there are ways around it. But my point is, that's a lot to do, right? Sure. And so like peak performance in general, there's a lot to do. You get huge benefits, right? Performance goes up, productivity goes up, motivation, all that stuff happens, but there's a lot to do. And in peak performance aging, that is equally true. And so one of the things that allowed me to do it, right, to do this, because I run a huge company, or not a huge company, but I run a mid-market company. I write a lot of books. I have a very busy, speaking schedule. My wife and I run a dog sanctuary. So there's a lot going on. I'm like, everybody else, not a lot of time. And, how do I get after it? And so we always look for stack protocols and multi-tool solutions. A multi-tool solution is a single solution that solves multiple problems at once. And the example I always give, though this is a kind of a minimal multi-tool solution, but it's an easy way to think about it, is mindfulness training. So mindfulness training from a flow perspective, anything that trains up focus is going to amplify flow. Anything that lowers anxiety, rids the body of cortisol and norepinephrine, is going to amplify flow. Both of those things have to get done if you want more flow in your life. So mindfulness is a single tool that solves two problems at once. That's a multi-tool solution. A stack protocol is, so if you're going to go after a physical challenge at any time, recovery matters. Later in life, it matters even more because it takes, for a bunch of different reasons, it takes older adults a little longer to recover. So you have to get really good at recovery tools. So what's a great recovery tool? Infrared sauna, any kind of sauna is a great recovery tool. But it's also one of my favorite things is that you can stack protocols. So I can go into a sauna for 20 minutes and I can do mindfulness while I'm in the sauna. So I'm doing two things at once, and the things that I'm doing solve multiple problems at once. And one of the reasons I like saunas is among their copious benefits, which are ridiculous, but they also actually train up your cardiovascular system. It's the only way you can get cardiovascular exercise without actually getting cardiovascular exercise. That's actually not true. Wim Hof breathing will do it too. So if you do Wim Hof breathing inside a sauna, be careful if you're doing breath holds. By the way, you can black out, but you can. It's really, people learn this the hard way in saunas. So like I'll do Wim Hof breathing and breath holds, but I make sure I'm leaning back so I don't go through the door. I
I'm like
sonnet people.
I was gonna say something tells me that's happened to you. Like you're
It
like
hasn't happened to me, but I will. So my friend Josh Waitzkin was doing breath work and in the bathtub and
oh
blacked
shit.
out and nearly drowned.
Oh shit.
So like, yeah. And so when I remember having this conversation with Josh, the reason I haven't, like, I've blacked out on saunas, but I've been leaning back. It hasn't happened to me, but no, it was actually a friend of mine who nearly killed himself doing breath holds in a bathtub.
Oh man, that's crazy. So I got to ask you this question because you talk about this a lot in the book, and the book really, it's almost in a certain sense like a journal of day to day, what you going out and, you know, all the things that you did day in and day out, one day at a time. And there was a term used, and I didn't look it up, and probably should have, but I was reading it, and the truth be told, I was reading this the book on vacation, so I didn't have a chance to look stuff up. So you use the term "ski the line." And I didn't know what it meant, and I would love for you to
see the line, ski the line. That's what I was that phrase.
Yeah, that you guys refer to it a bunch in the book. So like, we're skiing this line, so, and what does that mean? Right.
So first of all, great question. In action sports, action sport athletes have often thought of themselves as creatives, as artists, as much as athletes, sure. And they draw lines. That's what when you ski a line down a mountain through the snow, you are literally drawing a line down the mountain. When you surf across a wave, your fins are literally carving a line across the wave. So when, like, after a surfer is gone, after a skier is gone, the only proof of what they did is a line drawn in the snow that is only temporary. So, but you talk about like great action sport athletes. Are often action sport athletes who could see lines that other people couldn't. So Shane McConkey, one of the earliest, most famous skiers of all time. One of the things, what set Shane apart, he was a talented, amazingly talented skier and could do stuff that a lot of people couldn't do. But there were a lot of people like that. He could look at a mountain and see a way to draw a line. Like, I could link these three cliffs together. I can jump from there to here, jump from here to here, ski through this little sneaker thing, and they could draw a line down the mountain that nobody else could see. So skiers talk about, and snowboarders talk about being able to see lines, or you'll have climbers talk about it the same way. So in action sports, a line is usually a path up or a path down or a path across a surface.
Got it. Okay. I was trying to understand it, but that makes total sense. And I love the not even the analogy. I think there's so much truth in that when you watch these action sport athletes, it is art. You know, it's so artistic to watch. So the creativity that goes into it, and it makes a lot more sense now. All right. So big question coming up. All right. In the book, there's I don't want to call it alter ego persona that comes out by the name of Ghost.
Oh, the voice in my head. Oh, Ghost Dog. Ghost Dog.
Yeah.
Ghost Dog.
Yeah. Tell us about Ghost Dog.
So, part of this, it just evolved out of wanting to have sort of different terminology for skiing, for like experiences that I would like normally talk about academically or as a researcher, you know. And so Ghost Dog was literally, Ghost Dog mode became like the alter ego version of myself in deep flow states. And a lot of it, so skiers like different things. The easiest way for me to drop into flow, and this is kind of crazy, is often to ski through the trees. I like 8 to 10 inches of powder. Some people like really deep snow. I like 8 to 10 inches because it allows me to bounce around. So I'm literally like jumping around in the trees. I'm usually always, I tend to, some skiers really like attention. Other people like to just like, I'm an introvert. I'm always dressed in black. You can never see my face. And I'm, you know, as a general rule, like skiing alone through the trees, bouncing around, in a place that if this shit goes wrong, they're never even going to find my body. But like, it's, you know, it's instant flow state for me. But like when you're in that, so a couple things that are worth pointing out in deep flow, in action sports, when you are performing at your best, it's never sort of a solo thing. I call it in the book a gravity dance, because you're using gravity to extend what's possible for the human body, right? A human body at speed can do a lot of stuff that a human body standing still can't do, especially when moving down like a slippery snow-coated mountain. And it feels, especially in flow, as the boundary of self starts to get fuzzy. And we could talk about the neurobiology of why that happens, but the boundary of self gets fuzzy at the same time you're doing this, like you're cooperating with primal forces, gravity, mountains, snow, right? And it feels like this shared dance, right? This gravity dance that I talk about, but it also feels like the version that emerges, like the best version of me, so to speak. It's a different person. You know what I mean? It's a different person than I am most of the time. And, better, worse, whatever, definitely different. And I've given it a name. I call it ghost dog mode.
Yeah. The ghost dog got after it in the book.
Ghost dog.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I loved it, man. That's cool. Speaking of, getting into the flow state, like one of the things that at least my interpretation of this was, you really had a lot of like rituals, rules, regimens, testing, essentially testing your physical and mental schedules. Right. And I guess my question for you is, why do you think that was such an important part for you to move to higher and higher levels in park skiing? And how do you think, like, obviously most people are not going to go out and start park skiing, but how might they leverage these types of systems, rituals, cadences in their lives if they're trying to level up in some specific area similar to what you did? Again, not necessarily being as extreme as park skiing.
So, I'll give you a sort of a general. You may have to ask a more specific question, but here's what I can tell you. And a lot of I think of Gnar Country as sort of a companion book to Art of Impossible. Art of Impossible gives you sort of the big science of why a lot of this stuff works. But coming out of Art of Impossible, what people kept saying is like, okay, I've got all the science. How do you apply this? And so one of the reasons why Gnar Country is literally, as you pointed out, written as essentially a diary is I wanted people to understand what applied peak performance looks like. And the reason is peak performance and peak performance aging, they're checklists. They're a list of things you want to do every day or every week, right? And they get woven into other things you're doing, but it's nothing literally more complicated than that. And there are specific ways you want to do it and whatever, but like I wanted people to see what that looked like on a daily basis, just applying it over and over. And because it works, that's how you tackle sort of any hard challenge. And it was based on one of the hardest ideas that I find to communicate with anybody is in peak performance is that hard work works. Like it legitimately does. Hard work works. And so when I set out to do all these crazy things, when I went to the mountain, my goal was to ski 16 laps a day. If I learned a new trick, great, that was fantastic, but that was not the goal. I set a specific. I knew 12 laps is like I'm maintaining my fitness, right? I'm 16 laps, I'm pushing myself, and usually 16 laps, I'm going to drop into flow. And if I could get it up, my goal, good days on the hill was above 20, 25 laps. Then you're guaranteed to get into flow because you can't ski that much without the pain relief that comes from the state. Once I was in flow and performing my best, I knew I was going to learn tricks and advance my cause. But my cause was show up and ski 16 laps. And I wanted people to see, like, you can get to the impossible 16 laps at a time. Like, that's all I did, right? Yeah. I pushed through a lot of stuff to do that. But, like, in a sense, I wanted people to get a sense of, oh, wow, like hardware works. The other thing that's really difficult to teach to people about peak performance is peak performance works like compound interest, right? It's a little bit, push a little bit harder today, push a little bit harder tomorrow, but it's how it stacks up over months that give you the real result. And I wanted people to see that too. So one of the reasons they got like the ritual aspect of it is because peak performance is a checklist, and this stuff is available to everybody. And two, I wanted people to see what it looked like when you tried to apply that checklist to like a ridiculous task, right? Like, in a sense, like if the shit works for me at park skiing, imagine like what it's going to do if, you want to just learn how to play the piano.
Totally. Yeah. I love that. One word you made me think of is grit. You talk about grit in the book. You say that grit is a limited resource. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because when I heard you talk about, and you do it in the book a lot, I did my 16 laps and boom. And then on lap 20, your guys are doing gnarly shit in the park. And it's like, and you're in flow state. You could kind of watch that progression. At least that's how it read. Right. But what I always think back to, and I was a D1 athlete, grit is what, when you're performing at these higher levels, like grit gets you kind of far, but if it's a limited resource, tell us why that is. And then secondly, like how do we overcome that to be able to be in flow more often?
So 3 things here. The first thing, when I say grit is a limited resource, on a daily basis, grit is essentially tied to willpower. And Roy Baumeister proved very conclusively about willpower runs out on a daily basis. Now, he had an argument for why people have disagreed with his argument, but nobody disagrees with the fact that willpower declines over the course of a day, and that underpins grit. And you need some kind of powerful state change, usually sleeping, right, and eating, to reset it. Over long periods of time, if you're only reaching for grit, if that's the only tool you're reaching for, that is a recipe for burnout, right? Yeah. Guaranteed. And burnout is performance complete derailment. So you really want to avoid it at all costs. One of the things I say in our country, and one of the things that I think allowed me to do this, is we use grit as a last resort. So what I mean by that is it's the last tool I reach for, not the first tool. Most people just think I'm going to tough this out because they can, and they don't, and they know how to do that. And it's not that first of all, in any sort of Gnar style adventure, whether you're teaching yourself how to park ski or whatever, like there's going to be stuff that happens that's going to require grit anyways, right? So if grit is a limited resource, stuff is going to come up anyways, because it's a hard physical challenge that's going to require grit. So we would reach for at those last resort. In other words, we would often, when like a situation was like, oh wow, I don't have the motivation for this. Do I get gritty? No, there are 5 other massive intrinsic motivators that I'll reach for. So instead of trying to get gritty to like push myself in certain ways, we often will use you can use novelty as a motivator. For example, we would switch into exploratory mode. If we were like, if we're driving, trying to get into flow and skiing more and skiing harder, a lot of people would reach for risk, right? Oh, I know if I go into this scary line, that maybe that'll help. And that's a gritty choice, right? That's the sure. I'm going to push through my fear. And I was like, no. I'm going to actually dial the challenge way back and go into exploratory mode. Let's go look at parts of the mountain we've never seen before, and use novelty and exploration and creativity and that sort of stuff as motivation. That stuff all produces dopamine, all drives flow. And once I'm in flow, then you're performing your best. Maybe then it's time to go back and ski that gnarlier line, for example.
Got it. Okay, cool. That makes a lot of sense. It's interesting in reading the book, there's these moments that you guys go into like a group flow and you're skiing with other folks and you're playing games with them and you guys are doing it was really entertaining to read. But what I took from that is that proximity seems to be a big part of being able to challenge oneself to level up. And you use the term aping, copying, mimicking. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about like how that is a tool for folks that are trying to maybe get out of their comfort zone and try to do things that they haven't done.
So, group flow's separate discussion. This is sort of a discussion about embodied cognition, which is body cognition basically says our mind, our brain, our cognition, how we think doesn't just take place in the brain. Brains are also embedded in bodies. Bodies are embedded in the environment, and there's this conversation between all these levels. That is how we create. That's how we think. Applied embodied cognition basically says you can accelerate learning by coupling with movement. For example, if you're trying to learn a foreign language, right? If you couple words with gestures, you'll learn a lot faster. To just give you one example, give you a total inverse example, our pattern recognition skills go through the roof when we move. So radiologists on walking desks are significantly more accurate than radiologists sitting on their butt for these reasons. I could go on and on and on here, but one of the things about embodied cognition that really matters is when I was trying to learn how to park ski, for a lot of different reasons, we did it by playing follow the leader games. So either I would lead or my ski partner would lead. And when you watch somebody perform an action, we have mirror neurons in our prefrontal cortex, and the mirror neurons literally simulate the exact same motor program. So you watch somebody throw a 360 on skis, your mirror neurons run the exact same program as if you yourself were throwing the 360. You then get a interoceptive signal for your body. You'll get a little rush of pleasure, dopamine, a little bit of dopamine if you have the move, and you'll get a little bit of fear, norepinephrine, if you don't have the move. Because you're very good at interoception. You pay attention to the body signals. The way we would do this is this. We'd play follow the leader, and let's say I'm following Ryan around, and as I said, he's a former sponsored athlete. He's obviously a lot better than me. Let's say he did a move that, and I got a no-go signal. It didn't mean that I didn't try anything. It meant that I dialed it way back. So he did a 360, launching off the jump and sending a 360, 30 feet. Maybe I did a sliding spin 360 across the knuckle and flew like 5 feet. And I wasn't really in the air. I was just doing a more acrobatic trick. So I would dial it down or up based on interoception and did I get the signal. That was one of the things we did when we taught people how to park ski, and you get sort of groups of people doing it, and it feeds on itself a lot, and it amplifies learning. There's a lot of stuff going on. It's also a form of dynamic deliberate play, and dynamic deliberate play is sort of applied embodied cognition, and dynamic play is you're using all the use it or lose it. Dynamic play is the greatest multi-tool solution for peak performance aging because you've got strength, stamina, agility, all these things. But if you're using dynamic play, and I'll talk about dynamic deliberate play. Those words deliberate means something there, and I'll come back to it in a second. But dynamic motions train all the use it or lose it skills. So it's a fantastic multi-tool. So action sports in that way are really good multi-tools for peak performance aging because you're training a bunch of skills that you need to do it at once. If you're interested in lifelong learning, which is another secret to peak performance aging, if you want to stave off cognitive decline, for example, dementia, Alzheimer's, preserve as much neural function as you possibly can, you need expertise and wisdom. Those are the secrets, period. And those are slightly different skills, but basically underneath both of them, you have these big, wide neural nets. And so when you get cognitive decline or dementia and Alzheimer's, it tends to be singular portions of the brain. And by developing expertise and wisdom, you've got a lot of redundancy. Things are all over the brain. So dynamic play or dynamic deliberate play gives you sort of a bunch of this. Deliberate practice is Anders Ericsson's idea and expertise, right? Basically do the same thing over and over and over again, slightly advanced. And it's really good for learning, but it's not quite as good as what they call as deliberate play, which is repetition without repetition. I'm doing the same thing, but I'm improvising a little bit. It's what we were doing around the ski skill. We're playing follow the leader games. So we're getting these mirror neuron signals, but then it's like this dynamic, deliberate play. Play has tons of benefits, lowers, as I said, it increases learning. It lowers our risk of dementia, lowers our risk of heart disease. It produces brain-derived neurotropic factor, which helps increase learning and is neuroprotective against cognitive decline, except I can go on and on and on. But it was these modalities that sort of allowed me to go a lot faster and a lot farther than anybody thought possible, including myself. Right?
Yeah, it was really impressive just to read through it. And anyone that's going to listen to this and get the book, it's such a cool journey to watch it happen, like step by step.
It was a funny book because I had that journal. I was just keeping the journal, just have a record of the season. I had no idea the shit was going to work until like 2/3 of the way through the season. And I was like, oh, wow, this is actually working. Wow, maybe this should be a book, right? It was just an experiment. Like the Gnar Country, the first version of it is sort of like my diary of the experiment more than anything else.
That's so cool. So the whole thing is around, aging, flow and experimentation and aging well, right? The way I think about this is aging and not letting age get in the way of really having a quality second half of life. And so in the book, there's a couple things that you talk about. First of all, you mentioned that positive mindset towards aging prevents cognitive decline and adds up to 7.5 years of extra life. I'd love to talk about that, as well as some of the things that you think that you've studied that determine, that help people determine a better quality of life, like as they age. Like, well, like what did you find in that?
Yeah, I mean, it's positive mind. The mindset research, the sort of the godmother of it is Ellen Langer at Harvard. Harvard psychologist Ellen Langer she pioneered most of the work around mindset and aging, but like the what you just quoted, the 7.5 extra years, that showed up in a bunch of studies. But I think the most famous one is the Ohio longitudinal study on retirement and aging. It ran from 1975 to 1995, and it specifically looked at the impact on a positive mindset towards aging. That's literally, I believe, the second half of my life is filled with exciting and thrilling possibilities, right? The end result of a positive mindset towards aging is an extra 7.5 years of life, which is astounding, and has huge, and this is Ellen Langer's work, and I mean, huge, incredible impact on not just our mental health, our physical health, our physiology. So it's not that you just get an extra 7.5 years of life, you get an extra 7.5 years of high quality, healthy life. Wow. So that one thing is at the heart of all this. You gotta, really, really work on your mindset towards aging. The other things, it's really, I mean, you can summarize some of this stuff really actually quickly. Adults who engage in challenging social and creative activities are going to thrive so much more than anybody else. So like if taking one thing away from this, like later in life, challenging social creative activities, that's sort of what you're aiming for. If you really want to take it further, it's authentic challenging social creative activities. And authentic means there's a tight match between your values and your strengths and who you are and your actual actions. And you could build on that if you want to take the next step further. It's, older adults who do challenging creative social activities in novel outdoor environments are going to take it further. And this is one of the other things about action sports that's worth pointing out. I said earlier that action sports manage to train up all of the physical user to lose it skills that we think decline over time. The other thing that's really cool about action sports and aging is, so if you want to stave off cognitive decline, retain brain function, right, you want neurogenesis. You need the birth of new neurons. And the adult brain bursts about 700 new neurons a day, even until very, very late in life. But you can crank that up or turn it down depending on what you do. And one of the easiest ways to crank it up, most neurogenesis takes place in the hippocampus, which is a part of the brain that's sort of in the limbic system, in the temporal lobe, and it's where map making takes place. We talk about it in terms of memory, but it's really spatial memory. The brain wants to know where shit happened when like important stuff goes down. We evolved as hunter-gatherers. So like remembering where was the tiger that almost jumped me, or where was that ripe fruit tree, or where was dinner, where's the cave? That's survival. So we're really good at it. And so most of this neurogenesis is in the hippocampus because the hippocampus has place cells and grid cells and all the mapping cells, right? And when you have novel and emotionally exciting experiences in outdoor environments, this is literally what the hippocampus was designed to do. So action sports, skiing, for example, gives you novel outdoor, novel experiences in outdoor environments. It's exactly what you need to sort of birth new neurons. So this is also why, for example, the longest lived community in America is Summit County, Colorado, right? And number 2 is Pitkin County. And this is where Aspen and Vail and Beaver Creek and, meccas of outdoor activity and hiking and skiing and snowboarding and mountain biking and whatnot. So none of that's particularly surprising, but Summit County, Colorado outlives the rest of America by an additional 10 years.
Wow.
That's kind of significant.
Yeah. It's like another blue zone. That's insane. I did not know that. Gosh. So look, we're kind of rounding near the end of the show here. Here at the Greatness Machine, we are as I mentioned earlier, we're all about people who are living their passions to create greatness in the world. And I always like to end on a question with all of our guests. And so my question for you is this: what do you think is the biggest barrier for people reaching greatness in their lives? And maybe speak to your own experience, and how have you overcome these types of barriers in your own life to achieve the greatness that you've achieved?
You know, the thing that I always point out, and this is what I learned at the end of Art of Impossible, which is sort of, a book about the science of all this stuff. It's definitely the same thing true in Gnar Country. Over and over again, human beings are just capable of so much more than they know. But the only way you can figure out what you're capable of is by, is that challenge skill sweet spot. You got to push on your skills to the utmost again and again and again. You have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? Otherwise you cannot do that. And, that to me is, more than anything else is I got really comfortable being uncomfortable. And I was always, it wasn't just sort of that I was always willing to push myself. It's that I was always in everything I did seeking for, like, actively looking what scares me a lot, what direction. Every one of my books, for example, you mentioned Stealing Fire. So at the start of the show, and Stealing Fire, I said, every one of my books has a writing challenge. Like, I want to write in this cool style. I want to do that stuff. And then it's got the communication challenge. This is the information I want to teach you. But usually there's like a third secret challenge. In Stealing Fire, it was idea density. So to write that book, I had to be able to write sentences that were thicker and denser than almost any other, because there's so many facts in that book. I had to actually tell you twice as much as I would normally have to tell you. So I had to figure out, how do you put way more facts into a sentence without losing your reader? And so I spent a lot of time studying, for example, Steven Pinker, who's a science writer who has incredible density in his sentences, but they're fun, and he doesn't tend to lose his readers. So like I had to literally like make, he was one of the people I studied, but I always, like, everything I do, I'm always asking myself, what scares me here? Where's more of a challenge? How can I stretch myself? How can I keep going? And it's just, the willingness to sort of do that all the time. And I think the other thing is there's a flip side to that I would just, if I'm going to do something, my aim is to be best in the world. Now, am I going to fail? The vast majority of the time. Majority of the time I'm going to fail. But I don't get in the ring unless I'm trying for greatness. Like, I don't, like, if I just am thinking, I'm going to do this and I'll be mediocre at it, I will let somebody else's thing. The things that I'm going to jump into, I'm trying to be best in the world at.
I love it, man. Audience, the book is Gnar Country, Growing Old, Staying Rad. I grew up in SoCal in the 80s, so I can say rad and own that word. But man, Steven, what a treat to have you on the show. I learned so much. I could have asked you 30 more questions, but I got my top ones out. So when's the book come out? Where can people get it? What's the best way to connect on all the other projects you're working on?
So the book comes out February 28th. You can go to gnarcountry.com. So Gnar, Gnar country.com. And the cool thing is, we've got, we're running a really fun pre-sale campaign with tons of amazing bonuses. It's like, I've always wanted to build, like, because if you buy the book early, you help me a lot, right? It helps on the bestseller campaigns, all the stuff I'm trying to do with the book. You really helped me. And we actually built kick-ass bonus content for folks that really make all the stuff we've been talking about today actual and practical. So if you pre-order the book at the website, there's a whole bunch of bonus content, and it in a sense, everything we've been talking about, really made practical and actionable is there. So that's
awesome
for your listeners. You're Very the first person I've told about the website. It's brand new.
I'm pumped, man. So look, we'll put that in the show notes. And with that said, I know I want to get you out of here on time. Steven, you're a badass. The book's a badass book. And I'm so excited for all the all the learnings people are going to get from this amazing book, Gnar Country. Thank you so much for being on our show today.
Sir. My pleasure. Listen, thanks for your interest in my work.
Yeah, I really am a fan of your work, and it was really cool to get to do this. So listeners, go buy the book, share the book, get the promotional freebies that he's offering. We're going to put it in the show notes, as I mentioned. If you love this, share this with friends. And as Steven mentioned, when the books, when pre-order the books, this is how we help our authors really kick ass at their launch. So do Steven that favor. I'll be doing that. And with that said, we love you. Peace out from here at The Greatness Machine.
Thank you, sir.
You are listening to The Greatness Machine, and that's a wrap for today. Listen, if you love what you heard, subscribe to the show on whatever podcast platform that you're tuning in on so that you don't miss any of our future episodes. We have tons of great people coming on, and we're stoked to have you here to enjoy it with us. Leave us a review. Tell us what you love most about this particular episode. We love getting the reviews. We love to see what you guys love most. And if this particular episode, made you think of someone who's leveling up in their business and in their life, print screen, share it with them. Leaders are the best givers. And after all, we're all here to support and grow with each other. And in case you want to see some of the fun behind the scenes shots or some of the things that we're doing, I'm actually writing about this in my weekly newsletter. Go to www.therealdarius.com and subscribe to my newsletter. We're talking about fun things like business and life and mindfulness and cryptocurrencies and gosh, I don't even know, everything and anything, but it's tons of fun stuff I write about. I try to get it out on a weekly basis. You can subscribe at www.therealdarius.com. And with that said, look, thank you guys so much. I appreciate you. I love you. Peace. We're out of here. See you guys on the next one.
She's my lover.